Hello photography friends, this is Annette Stiers-Jones. Today's video is going to be all about masking and how I like to use masks in my landscape photography and cityscape photography. So I'll get started by working with this image of sunrise over the Seattle skyline as viewed from Kerry Park. And it's an okay photo. It was a really nice sunrise, but it could be a lot better. And what I'd mostly like to do is use mask to selectively put the light where I want the viewer's attention to be, and then also remove distractions. So let's get started. The masking panel is this gray dot on the right panel of your develop module. So I'm going to click this. And now my options for mask appear. So there's several different things here to choose from. We'll go through a lot of these today, but I'm going to start with brush first. So I'll click on brush. And then we see in the panel appear tools to adjust our brush. We can change the size, the amount of feathering, the flow, the density. I'm happy where the size is at right now, which we can kind of see here by these circles with the crosshairs in the center. That demonstrates where the brush is going to be. And then the outer circle shows how much feathering has been applied. And I like to have a good amount of feathering so we don't have a hard edge for this particular mask. What I'm going to use this for is to work on the yellow in this building. I find it to be distracting, so I'm going to click and drag to just paint across this area that has the yellow color. And you can see what I've selected with this red overlay. So now what I'm going to do is make some adjustments. We have almost all the same adjustments as in the normal develop module within the mask. And the one I'm going to choose for this mask is point color. I'm going to click on the eyedropper tool, and then I'm able to use the eyedropper tool to click directly on the color that I want to change. And so now we see our point color has been added here. And we have sliders I can use to adjust the hue, the saturation, and the luminance. For this, I want to make it less saturated and also bring down the luminance. So now that building doesn't stand out nearly as much as it did before. And if you want to see before versus after, you can go to where your mask is and click on this eye. And now we see without the mask, and then when we let go, we see with the mask. So I'm happy with how this looks now. It's much less distracting than it was before. The next thing I want to work on is another distracting area. This area at the base of the Space Needle is really bright, and it unnecessarily draws attention to this area. So I'm going to create a second mask to work on this area, and I'll use brush again. I'm still happy with the size and the amount of feathering, so I'll just go in and paint over this area that I want to affect. I'm going to zoom in on that area so I can see better what I'm doing. Now, one thing I'm going to do differently with this brush mask is I only want to affect the light, bright parts of this area. So I'm going to intersect this mask with another type to further refine it. To do that, I click on the three dots and go to intersect mask with. And from here we can select any of the mask types that we would like, but I'm going to choose luminance range. And you'll see I have this eyedropper tool that appears, and I will use that to click on the area that I want to affect, and that's the bright part here. So I'll click here, and now we see at the top of the masking panel this luminance range that has appeared. And we have sliders we can use to further refine this. And it's still selecting more than I would like, so I'm going to drag this so it affects less of the shadows. And you can see as I slide, the red starts to disappear from some of those shadow areas. And then I can also click on the center of this if I would like to further drag this more towards the light part of the image. And that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and start making some adjustments. I'll start by bringing down the highlights. That certainly helps. I'll also try bringing down the whites a bit. And that still looks pretty nice. It stands out a bit here still because it has more of a blue-green tint to it. So I'm going to add a little bit of magenta to try to counteract that green. And actually, I'm going to try a little bit of blue. It's really more of a yellow-green that I'm trying to counteract here. So I'll add a bit of blue on the temperature and a bit of magenta on the tint. And now let's zoom back out and see how this looks. I'll go over to the mask I just created and I'll click on the eye symbol and hold to see without. So there's without, and then I let go, and here's with. So I think that looks pretty good. It's much less distracting than it was before. So let's move on to the next thing I'd like to correct. So we have Mount Rainier here in the background, and it's a little hard to see, it's a little hard to make out. So there's a few different ways I could go about this. And first I'll show you the way I would not choose to do it. And then next I'll show the way I would like to do it. So first let's start with the way I don't prefer. And for that, I'm going to use a select landscape tool. So this will take a while for AI to identify the different parts of the image. And when it does, it will populate some selections here for us to choose from. So Lightroom has populated landscape mask options over here on the right. So if we hover over sky, it will show us what it thinks is the sky. And you'll notice it does include the mountain within that. Then we can hover over mountains and we can see that it's selected the mountain area. For architecture, we've got most of the buildings here in the city, so that was a pretty good choice. And vegetation, it is selecting the trees. So for this, I'm going to select mountains and I'll do create mask. And so now we have mask 3. We see that it's highlighted this area of Mount Rainier. And what I'd like to do is make it stand out a bit more by using the clarity and dehaze tools. So I'll come down here to clarity and I will drag this to the right to drive more clarity in the image. And I'll add a little dehaze as well, and some texture. And it is helping in that the mountain has a bit more detail to it. We can see some of the texture here, But we'll also notice that over here on the right, where it hasn't made quite a perfect selection, we've got some of the sky that's being darkened too. And we also kind of have a bit of a halo effect where we can see it gets lighter towards the edge of the horizon, and then darker up here where we've added the dehaze and clarity effects. So because of the hard edges that you can get with masks like this, that's one of the reasons I prefer to instead use a radial gradient. So I'm going to delete that mask. And so I do that by clicking the three dots and go down to delete mask 3. So now that mask is gone, we're back to our hazy mountain. So I'll go back to create mask and I'll choose radial gradient this time. So now I have these crosshairs that appear, and I'm going to put the center of the crosshairs right on the center of Mount Rainier, and then I'll click and drag until I get a nice radial gradient. And I want to move this a bit, and I do that by hovering over the center dot until I see the cursor turn into this hand symbol, and I can drag it here just to get that a bit more centered. And then I can also drag this red dot when I see the cursor change to this double arrow symbol, and now we'll adjust the feathering. So the more I bring it in, the more feathered it is. The more I bring it out, the harder the edge. So let's bring that into a nice, soft feather. And I'll go back to the clarity and texture and dehaze. Add some clarity, some texture, and a little bit of dehaze. Just a little bit. Okay, now that's looking pretty good. Let's take a look at with and without. So click and hold on the eye. There's without. And there's with. So now the mountain stands out a bit better than it did before. Great, so we're making good progress. I want to work a bit on the sky area now. What I don't like about the sky is that all the brightness is up over here in this left corner, and it kind of leads my eye up and off the page instead of staying within the image. So to do this, I'm going to use a linear gradient. So I'm going to come here to the plus sign and click linear gradient. And just like for the radial gradient, we'll get the crosshair symbol, and then I will click and drag, but this time it will be a linear mask instead of a radial one. So this looks pretty good. Now again, I've got the hand symbol that if I grab the black square in the center, I can move this around to change the area it's affecting. And I can also adjust the angle if I hover over this outer dot until it becomes arrows that are curved. Then I can rotate to get a different angle on this mask. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to come back over to the panel on the right to make adjustments. I'm going to start by bringing down the exposure just a little bit. And that looks pretty good. It looks much more balanced compared to the rest of the sky. It's about the same luminosity as what we have over here, but we've still got this bright area where the sun, we would expect it to be. So one more thing I'm going to do to work on the sky, I'd like to bring down this bright white area and bring out more of the color in that spot. So I'm going to go to radial gradient again. I've got the crosshairs. I click and drag, but I'm going to make a very long, narrow ellipse for this one. Then I'll come here to the end to adjust the angle, looking for those arched arrows, and just so it covers up that bright white spot in the sky. So now I'll go to the adjustments. I'll bring down the exposure a little bit, and I'll try to bring down the highlights a bit. And that's looking pretty good. So I think I'll leave that there. Another spot in the sky I want to work on is this dark cloud right here. It really stands out and distracts me and doesn't quite fit with the rest of the sky. So I'm going to use radial gradient again. Click and drag right over that cloud area. Adjust the position from the center, just clicking and dragging to where I like it. Now, to soften that cloud, I'm going to add a bit of haze, so the opposite of what we did for the mountain. So I'll drag dehaze to the left, and at first this is going to look too white, but stay with me. I'm going to go back to the top, and I'm going to add a bit of yellow and a bit of magenta. I'll saturate this a bit and then bring down the highlights quite a bit. And so now that cloud blends in a lot more than it did before. I think maybe that's a little too strong of an effect, so I'm going to click this amount slider at the very top here of the mask panel. So I click and drag that to the left. If I drag it all the way down to 0, we see no effect. And then I can change the percentage applied so it's not quite so strong of an effect. I think I like it here. I would like to adjust the feathering on this a bit. And then I'll move it a bit to the left, really get it over the center of that cloud. Okay. So I think this is looking better and better. One last thing I want to do is another radial gradient. And I'm going to use this for the left-hand side of the sky. And I want to add more color and more glow over here where the sun would be. So similar to the last mask, I'm going to add some haze to really kind of bring out a nice dreamy effect. It's going to look too bright and white to begin with, but just like the last mask, I'm going to add some yellow and some magenta, some saturation, and then I'll bring down the highlights and maybe bring down the whites a bit too. Okay, and so now, rather than a white washed out area, we've got a lot more color over there. So to just look at with and without that effect, I'll click on the eye symbol. There's without, and there's with. So again, I think it's a bit much. I'll go to my amount slider and decrease the amount a bit to make the effect less strong. And there we go. I think we've got a pretty nice image image here. So one last thing I'll do is to show without all the masks. I'll click the eye symbol at the very top, and this will turn off all the masks at once. So this is without, and this is with. And there we go. One more tip, if you ever find this mask panel distracting, you can actually grab this bar at the top and move it over to dock it within the right panel. And so now you can see the entire image instead of having your mask cluttering up the top right corner. So I'll try one more time to show without the masks and with. Great. I hope you enjoyed this video. This is my first online tutorial, first video tutorial. I'd love to know your feedback, so please drop a comment. And until next time, happy shooting.